Hello, RotoBallers. It's the week before the fantasy championships, but we aren't there yet. So let me help you punch that ticket to the big dance. That said, here are my starts and sits at the wide receiver and quarterback positions for week number 16. First up, those wide receivers, starting with Mike Evans versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are both great options this week against the Jaguars defense that is allowing 35 fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position this season and just over 36 fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks. Evans has an average depth of target of 14.9 yards and has accumulated 664 air yards along with a 41.4% air yard share, which all rank amongst the top 10 amongst the wideout position. Now Baker Mayfield, he is feeling it dealing with Mike Evans this season. Not only has Evans broke the 1,000 yard barrier once again, he is also averaging 9.62 yards per target and has been a big play waiting to happen, as his 16.3 yards per reception would indicate. My second wide receiver is Chris Alve versus the Los Angeles Rams. Now Olave, he did miss last week, but this is a great matchup after watching Terry McLaurin put up 141 yards and a score against this Rams secondary. And over the last 4 weeks, this Rams team is allowing over 42 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Heck, they even allowed Curtis Samuel to find the end zone not just once, but twice. Now this season, amongst wide receivers with 325 routes or more, Olave's 14.2 average depth of target, that ranks 9th. He has also accounted for 1,631 air yards, which is a third most, and a 41.4% Saints air yard share. This is a plus matchup on a short week for Olave, which, if he is unable to go, Rashid Shaheed is a sneaky option who had 12 targets, hauling in 9 of them for 108 yards and a touchdown with Olave out on Sunday. With players like Jamar Chase and Tyreek Hill potentially being out this week or limited, you may need a sleeper to step up. So Tyler Boyd versus the Pittsburgh Steelers is that play. Jake Browning is spreading the ball around, and Boyd, who was targeted on 5 occasions last week, resulting in 53 yards, is going to be one of those guys that you could probably trust this week. The Steelers' attention is going to be on T. Higgins, and rightfully so this week. Now, the Steelers, they have allowed less than 17 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, but, and here's the but, Tyler Boyd will be working out of the slot, where teams have found success against the Steelers this season, as the Steelers are allowing the 5th most fantasy points per target to opposing slot receivers. Now for those wide receivers that you're sitting, Terry McLaurin versus the New York Jets. That was a short-lived fantasy high for McLaurin and his fantasy managers, who went from facing one of the worst passing defenses last week. Now they have to face one of the best pass defenses in the New York Jets, who are allowing roughly 22.5 fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks and have allowed just 1,486 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns to wide receivers this season. Both the yards and the touchdowns surrendered are the fewest in the NFL. McLaurin is somehow just 165 yards away from 1,000 this season, but he may need every game left on the schedule to hit that milestone. The second wide receiver you're sitting is Marquise Brown versus Chicago. Brown is almost in that Gabe Davis, never will I ever tier for me at this point. I mean, this dude, I have backed him all season long, but the injuries and whatnot, they have slowed him down. And again, he exited last week's contest against the 49ers without even registering a single catch. This week, I don't see it getting any better, having to suit up against the Chicago Bears team that has allowed the 9th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers over the last month or so. With Kyler Murray under center the last few weeks here, Brown has seen just 20 targets. That's 1 fewer than Greg Dortch and just 1 more than Rondale Moore over that time. Yeah, that's a solid no for me. Now, Drake London versus Indianapolis. Remember that scene there in Thor Ragnarok where Thor insists on going to fight the Grandmasters champion? Korg's like, another day, another dog. Well, that's what the Falcons are. Arthur Smith provides fantasy managers with that comic relief at this point. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. And we have another quarterback change going on, as Tyler Heineke will now be under center once again for the Falcons. Honestly, this probably helps both London and Pitts, but here's the problem. The Colts have allowed the 7th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks, as teams have elected to run the ball to the tune of 26.7 fantasy points per game, and that is the 3rd most against the Colts. As for quarterbacks you're starting, here we go. Justin Fields versus the Arizona Cardinals, who have been allowing 20 fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks to the quarterbacks, having allowed a league-high 9 passing touchdowns. Arizona has also allowed 26 passing touchdowns on the season, and that trails only the Philadelphia Eagles and the Washington Commanders. And it's not like they've been out there forcing turnovers, as they only have 9 interceptions to show for it. I just don't see how the Cardinals are going to be able to stop Justin Fields and DJ Moore. Another fact working for Fields this week is that the Cardinals have allowed at least 19 fantasy points to the quarterback position in 5 of their last 6 games. The second quarterback you can fire up this week is Jake Browning versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is strength versus strength. The Steelers, they held Browning at just 227 yards and a touchdown, picking him off back in week number 12 when Browning was making his first career start. But that was 3 plus 20 fantasy weeks ago there, as Browning has averaged 23.4 fantasy points in the last 3 games since that first career start. Browning has thrown for 275 plus yards in each of those 3 contests, while averaging 9.1 yards per attempt, including leading the Bengals to a 14-point comeback against the Vikings, where in the fourth quarter he had a 140.6 passer rating, completing 12 of 16 passes for 140 yards and a pair of touchdowns, including that game-tying one to T. Higgins in the back of the end zone. And let's put some respect on Baker Mayfield's name as he takes on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Another great matchup for Mayfield, who is making a case for comeback player of the year. The Jaguars have allowed 1,140 passing yards and 7 touchdowns over the last 4 weeks, which adds up to the second most fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position at 24.23. Mayfield has produced 20 or more fantasy points now in back-to-back weeks and has averaged 17.1 per contest this season and pushed himself inside the top 15 amongst quarterbacks. As for those quarterbacks you're sitting, Sam Howell versus the New York Jets. The Jets are allowing the third fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks this season, 12.5 per game, and they have been allowing the third fewest passing yards to date. Over the last 4 weeks, they have been even better, allowing a league-low 8.3 fantasy points per game and allowing less than 700 passing yards there, while allowing 3 touchdown passes and picking off a pair themselves. It's never a good thing when you've already been replaced once by Jacoby Brissett. My second quarterback sit of the week is Jordan Love versus the New England Patriots. This season, the Patriots have allowed 16 passing touchdowns, but they've also got 9 interceptions of their own. They've also allowed 3,310 passing yards. Yet nothing here seems to be too concerning. Yet when you add this all up for fantasy, they are allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. And with a berth into your fantasy championships on the line, you may want to consider pivoting this week. And finally, sit Kyler Murray versus the Chicago Bears. There may not be a team right now playing better defense than the Bears have been playing. Since week 10, Murray has been averaging 17.7 fantasy points per game, and that's the QB 15 over time. Good for him. No, really, good for him. But over the last 4 weeks, Chicago is allowing less than 9 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks there and holding them to 725 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. But here's the thing. In that 4-week period, 9 interceptions. That is 3 more than the Miami Dolphins, who are the next closest team in that department. Once again, this video is being recorded on Monday, so plenty can happen between now and Sunday's kickoff. So make sure you're checking out RotoBaller.com and the RotoBaller Discord channel for all the latest fantasy football news. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you next time.